What is the role of a human performance coach?
That is a great question and has probably changed over the last 50 years or so. Really, ultimately, it is trying to understand what makes a human tick and how can we change the things that they do or help them to perform to the best of their ability in whatever environment that might be, whether that is an elite athlete, a high-performing executive, or a parent. It doesn't really matter. That whole idea of human hasn't really changed, or a human being, we haven't really changed for very many, for lots of years. We haven't really had to adapt this kind of idea. So that's where this idea of human performance comes from.
So I suppose it's like an umbrella term of general human performance, and then you've got the specific areas below it, like you said, sports or parenting, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how do you find it working alongside so many high performers, or I suppose people that you can then help to become high performers?
We're trying to look at kind of the individual and understanding about them, but then also the environment or the sport or whatever they're trying to achieve, and trying to put those two together. So really, if you go down the sports science route or human performance route, one of the earliest things you probably learn in your degree is looking at a needs analysis. So needs analysis is pretty simply just looking at what are the needs and demand of that sport or that event, and what do we need to physically, mentally, tactically, technically prepare for that. And so by understanding that, we can have an appreciation of what capacity looks like, what performance looks like, and ultimately develop ways, means, methods to help that person perform to their full potential.
Do you see a lot of similarities between the people you work with, maybe things that lend themselves to their high performing nature, or are they quite different when they come to you?
There are ultimately traits of high performers, in terms of kind of discipline, understanding what they're trying to achieve. I do believe that the best people that I've ever worked with are very clear on their vision of where they want to go. They're very understanding of, right, this is where I would like to be in 5-10 years. Not only just in terms of like how they see that, but how they feel that, how they touch that. And then what they're really good at is understanding that they're starting with that end in mind. So then they kind of, Stephen Covey style, they work themselves back so that they realize that the decisions that they make from a day-to-day point of view are ultimately moving themselves down that road. Sometimes I think we can get too worried about the fact of the decisions are we making today, are they doing anything, basically, instead of saying, right, actually I've got a clear plan, I know my goals for the next 6 months, 9 months, whatever that looks like, and bring it back down so that then you don't get caught up in where you want to go, you get caught up in actually performing today.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what they were doing, whether that's a warm-up or whether that's their first meeting of the day, they are focused on that thing at that point in time.
I suppose like a sort of common example of that would be people sort of working out and knowing the goal they want to get to, knowing that they want to lose a certain amount of weight, whatever it might be. But then as they start to do it, they lose that motivation. Just one workout gets dropped. What's one workout today? But it's linking the two together, I suppose, and just reminding yourself that you've got the goal at the end, and because of that you've worked backwards, and those little days, everyone matters.
Yeah.
And those little steps, I suppose.
And for me, just on that point, from a training point of view, I've spent a lot of time in gyms with athletes, and majority of the time, I am, or the coach is the ones that's prescribed what's going to happen. And now, kind of moving more, I suppose, into general population gyms, it's amazing how many times I go to the gym and you see people walk in and they don't really know what they're doing. Oh my God, someone's on the bench press. It's a Monday. What am I going to do? How can I adapt this? They don't have an understanding, or they don't say, right, okay, this is what it looks like today. However, if something changes, how can I adapt it? What can we do to get the best out of today? And then you're kind of in this situation where you haven't got a plan in place. After 4, 6 weeks, you're not starting to see the results. So then, you know what? My motivation tends to drop off.
And I suppose that comes into education in that early stage of why we're doing everything. So again, staying on that gym idea is we do this exercise because of this benefit, and we're doing this style of workout today for these benefits, but you can also substitute in these styles. This would also work. Trying to help them to understand why they are doing what they're doing and not just prescribing a shopping list of exercise, basically.
Yeah.
So with the people that you work with now, what are some of the common challenges that you come up across? Is there any things that come to mind that people tend to be struggling with?
So looking back at that needs analysis and kind of interviewing, high performers or senior leaders, there are three big common denominators. One is a sense of lack of time. I just don't have enough time. That's across the board. Second is this kind of sense of I can't engage in one thing at a time. There's too much going on. There's this overwhelm. And probably the last point is, ultimately what I'm doing today, is that any use? Is that going to get me to where I want to go, basically? And they're the big three that come up all the time in conversations.
Yeah. And how would you start to sort of tackle some of those? Because things like not having enough time is a very common thing you hear from a lot of people when they maybe have a plan or an idea that they want to start something, but they don't have the time. It's probably one of the most common things, right?
So exactly. And it's kind of trying to shift away from time and more kind of thinking about energy. We've only got 24 hours in a day. Let's say we're being a good human being, we're trying to sleep 7 to 9. So then we know that work might come in. So there's already commitments gone. So we have to understand that actually it's the energy that we take into the things that we do are ultimately the big performance benefits. And there's lots that we can do for energy management, and obviously we're talking about the foundations of well-being in terms of sleep, eat, move, think, and how we breathe. The basics, the 5 basics of, and I mean that not necessarily saying, oh, they're easy, but the 5 things that really help us. And then on top of that is, it's amazing how easy it is for example, people to get up early if they're going on holiday or they're going to do something that they really enjoy. Whereas if they're not in a working environment or, they're not being fulfilled from what they do day to day, then it's a grind to get out of bed.
So jumping back a bit before you got into this area of work, so 20 years you've been in and amongst various levels and various areas of coaching. Where did it start for you? What sort of drew you into that area at the beginning? Can you remember?
So sport had always played a big part of my life. I wouldn't say I had a challenging upbringing, but I am dyslexic, and I didn't kind of really figure that out until probably university, and a university lecturer talking about me. So there's always this element from my perspective of the love of sport. And I kind of fell into coaching because a friend of mine, she said, hey, look, I think I was 17 at the time. And she said, there's this swimming course that you can come and you can learn to be a swimming coach if you want to. And I'd always been quite good at swimming. So went along, did that. And then just by chance, the local swimming pool, they had a swimming school and there was a role, and the lady said, yep. So I basically got to teach kids how to swim from the age of 17.
Okay.
And, it's great. I was earning more money than my friends for working in Tesco's or whatever. And I was getting to do some stuff. And I was able to kind of pull back and take this 6-year-old boy who'd fallen into a pool when they were on holiday in Spain and kind of a massive fear of water, and to try to bring him back into being able to swim, basically. And from that moment, that idea of how do we take somebody from A to B, and how do we support them along the road via coaching, mentoring, and all those different elements. And that's kind of that gave me the interest, and I was like, right, okay. So next step would have been, let's go to university to learn more about that. And then I came out and spent some time kind of going around coaching lots of different sports, not really doing so much physical stuff. And I was like, right, okay, I really want to go into professional sport to look at what the best do. So that kind of led to a master's in human performance. And then that was kind of my kind of professional, I
Mm.
suppose, sports life took off basically.
Yeah. Did you find in that early stages when you were doing the swimming instructing, and obviously that's quite a poignant story, trying to get someone from A to B when they've been through something quite traumatic. Did that come quite naturally to you, that sort of coaching them through that?
I would say hopefully yes. That's I wouldn't was it whether it's natural or I just got a lot of fulfillment out of it. I really enjoyed it. So, it's not it wasn't work. It wasn't I need to go to, teach today. It was kind of like, right, this is the process to go through.
Yeah.
And then I think once you get to a point where you really enjoy something, there's this natural drive, this natural curiosity. If you look at Daniel Pink's work around motivation, there's three big kind of key areas of motivation: autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Right.
So I felt as if I had some mastery. I felt as if I was right. I wanted to be good at doing this, and I had a purpose. I had an element where I was taking somebody from A to B, getting feedback, and that was a big part of it.
Mm. And you spoke as well about your experience of dyslexia. So finding out in university is quite late on, I would say, compared to a lot of people. Did you struggle with that before finding out? Was it something you never really understood?
Yeah. So
Or
yeah, probably preschool, not preschool, sorry, probably primary school, in that area of kind of late 80s, early 90s, it was probably discussed. It was
Mm.
probably on you know, the spectrum of where things were. But I look back now and kind of the things that caused, you know, trauma it's an interesting one when you say trauma, because everyone thinks these massive things that happen to us, life, death, etc. But, for me, there were some traumatic times. And so looking back now, and, there is huge benefit of going back and looking at things that have gone wrong in our lives and pulling yourself out and what can you learn from it. Um, there were probably elements where I go back now, I'm like, right, how could they have supported me better? Or what did I need to thrive?
Mm.
Fortunately, even though we are 30 years down the line, sometimes with a daughter and a son now who go to school, and you can see the support, and you question whether that's changed much.
Mm.
But for me, there was this element of I want to support people who are struggling or people who want to get better, because that's a huge, I suppose, selfish motivation for me to feel as if that's my purpose.
Yeah, and I've spoken to people. One of my guests, quite early on, Tom, spoke about his journey through having dyslexia, and he, like you, found out quite late, and then some of those feelings of could I've been supported more. But it's interesting that you've both actually went down quite similar routes. He went into sort of sports and sports science area of things. So that draw of sports, whether that's related or it's just coincidence.
Well, I think I couldn't. I couldn't say I couldn't perform academically. I couldn't, you know, let that outlet from academia. So the only other kind of big outlet was sport. So, you know, I could get my fix from playing football, cricket, golf, tennis, loads of different sports, swimming, etc. And I could get that sense of mastery. I could get that sense of actually I'm getting better at this.
Mm.
Whereas from an academic point of view, I couldn't logically see, I suppose, in my head, like, you are here, you do all this work, and then you're there. I couldn't, I was 12 or 13 or 11, whatever it was. I couldn't in my head picture that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something that um, I met my girlfriend now almost 6 years ago, and she's dyslexia. She's dyslexic, and one of the first things when she first met me, she showed me this video on YouTube that sort of simulates what it's like for her to read, and these letters are like spinning off the page and jumping about, and lines get missed. And it's probably the first time I've really sort of understood it a bit more and been like, actually, that is like really, that must be really difficult. So, and in there, you mentioned about seeing your children go to school and the support there. Do you think we have gone forward in terms of support for that thing? Because it's definitely a word that everyone knows, but I don't think people really understand it.
No, because the fact is that 1 in 5 of us are dyslexic. But if you go to a school, 1 in 5 teachers will not be specialists in, special education needs.
Mm,
There might be a special education needs coordinator, or, you might have a certain teacher that has that particular area, but you don't see that amount of support happening. And I look back now and I definitely see it as advantageous stuff, because I was able to sit down and think to myself, right, okay, I learn differently to other people. So you can push it how much you want it, but I'm not going to take stuff. So I needed to find and navigate that way through, whether that was mind maps or using different color paper, whatever it might be, listening to audio books, however that looked like, or for me, if I look at kind of Myers-Briggs personality types, it's a really interesting one where people say, right, you're either extrovert or introvert, and that doesn't mean that you're kind of outgoing or shy. That's a myth. But for me, when I'm trying to work or trying to learn, I'm very introverted. I need peace, quiet, noise cancelling headphones. And I think that then when I pull myself back out and I go into probably the clients that I work with, and we talk about how to create the best environment, some things don't lend themselves to that person. If
mm.
you are an extrovert, you get energy from being around people. Working from home might not be your bag. Likewise, if you are that type of person who wants to be focused and, needs some real dedicated quiet time, being in an open plan office and people interrupting you every 6 minutes as the average goes is not the best environment for
Is that
you.
the average?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before. But yeah, you're completely right. I suppose it comes down to that, like the needs analysis of the individual. And that's why we've almost got to do that for ourselves and work out exactly like who we are and what we need. And everyone could benefit from that, I imagine, just
Yeah.
understanding a little bit more. In terms of your work, so I'll go back to that. So you say that your life's passion is coaching people to achieve their full leadership potential. What do you think makes a good leader?
Oh, that's a big question. So I think that, kind of as we discussed a little bit earlier, there are so many leadership models out there, how that looks like. But I think if I look back now at kind of the best leaders that I worked with in terms of captains, or leaders in the gym or on the pitch, CEOs, etc., etc., there's a pure sense of self leadership. They know who they are. They lead with authenticity. They lead with vulnerability in a controlled sense. And that's from a huge emotional intelligence point of view, that they are able to regulate their emotions so that when things aren't going well, or even when things are going really well, they are able to keep the ship steady.
Mm,
And they also understand that that comes at a price, that they then need to take time away from themselves to decompartmentalize what's just happened.
mm,
And you'll see it a lot, whereby, if you ever watch kind of sports documentaries, and it's interesting. I think it's Richard Hill, who is a former England rugby player who won the World Cup, and he speaks, they just won the World Cup. And you'd think, oh, so much euphoria, etc., etc. Came off the pitch, and then he just went and sat in the shower room on his own for 5, 10 minutes just to kind of get on board what's happened.
Yeah.
And in sport, we have those opportunities. In business, or sometimes we don't, because we've just done something and it's either been really good, really bad, or whatever it might look like. We're on to the next thing, we're on to the next thing. And you don't have that time to take stock.
Mm.
And I think there's a huge element where, especially if you look at game sports, there's a match and then there'll be this whole kind of debrief after it. We'll review the game, what went right, what went wrong. Whereas sometimes in business, it's like, right, we finished the project. Normally 9 times out of 10, we've already started the next project before we've finished the next project. And we're constantly, I do some work with project managers and architects, and they are working on 5 or 6 things all the time. And so there's no chance when they're like, right, yeah, we finished that building or we finished that project. Let's take a bit of stock, because the next one's come in, the next one's come in, and you're on this conveyor belt.
Yeah. I suppose, within sports, it's sort of naturally baked into how sports are run. You've got the changing rooms before, during, and after a game. They're the perfect opportunities where you're not playing, where you can just talk about what's just happened. But I suppose in those corporate scenarios, as you've spoken about, sort of going back to that idea of what a leader is, I suppose it's a case of almost like leading by example, which is maybe a cliche thing to say, but if you have a leader who does what they're asking you to do, you're way more likely to do it and want to do it to the same standard than someone who shows none of the behaviors that they're asking you to do. So sort of taking stock of yourself as a leader and doing the work behind the scenes, I suppose.
Yeah, leaders recreate leaders, and we are all leaders, in whatever. So, if you're a firefighter, you're leading yourself. You might be leading others. It's an interesting one where you say, right, I'm a leader for my girlfriend or my partner or a child or being a parent. But you understand that in the environments that we create, or the environments that we go into, that formulates, that kind of forces us. So then what's really interesting is then you have huge opportunities to influence your environment, influence the people you're around. You can't control people. The harder you try and control somebody, or the harder you try and control something, the more challenging it becomes. I'm a bit of a believer, or kind of come to a bit of kind of light bulb moment whereby, what can we truly control? How often do we see people who are really healthy individuals, and unfortunately, they lose their health quite rapidly, whatever that's through. And you're like, hold on a second, that person was doing everything possible to control that. But you can't. You can only influence what you can influence. And there's this whole element of, control the controllables. And I just think to myself, what is truly controllable, and how much pressure I see leaders, or how much pressure I see people trying to control situations. And actually, you don't get very far with that. But then, so how can I influence my health? So, well, making sure that I'm getting good quality sleep, making sure that I'm moving enough, making sure that I'm eating the highest quality of food that I can, making sure that I give myself time to think about things. And then ultimately, like, how well am I breathing? All those elements I can start to influence. And that helps.
I suppose you're controlling, like you say, what you can control, but then there's always going to be stuff like, if you are training and you're controlling your health and eating well, all it takes is an injury or illness to take that away from you. But then I suppose you can also control the way you react to that, and the mindset that you take into that and accepting that might happen. If you're trying to control everything ahead of time and not even considering that that's a possibility, I suppose that's where it becomes a problem because it's sort of a blind, you just got blinkers on. You can't see the illness or the thing that might come, and suddenly it's there.
Yep.
And that would knock you a lot further than if you were sort of aware that might happen, and you had the ability to look at it and, right, what can I control in my reaction to this now?
Yeah.
Um,
And, you know, people talk about mindset, and I think it's an interesting one where if you've done all those things to influence, I guarantee that your mindset will be as best as it can be.
mm,
You know, if you're tired, if you're hungry, or whatever it might be, you're not really thinking about it. Your mindset's kind of a tougher challenge.
yeah, yeah. And for people listening who maybe are in leadership roles or are thinking about going into it and they might not feel 100%, is there any ways that they can sort of make themselves a better leader, I suppose? It's a difficult question.
I think so. One is understanding or having a clear understanding of emotional intelligence. So some self-awareness. How are people perceiving me? Some emotional regulation. That's a great starting point. You know, to really delve into that subject and ask yourself those questions. I think the next element is we probably going back to that sports thing is that if you're a professional athlete, and what I do see is there's kind of a mixed kind of role from a professional athlete to a leader. And what I mean by that is, let's say, I know you start playing football at a young age, you'll have a parent that coaches. Then you get a bit better, you might go to a team, you might get a coach that's paid and been through educate. Then you go up, and then you know you might have a specific coach that coaches you on that element, and then you might get some video analysis, you might get some GPS data. You work all the way through to a professional, and you've got every ounce of kind of support data, whatever you want. If we think about it now from a leadership point of view in a corporate setting, okay, so I come in, I'm a junior, I'm going to get loads of support, I make the step up, I'm going to get loads of support again, and then as I go up and I get to this leadership, hold on a second, there's no real kind of feedback for me because I'm deemed top of this triangle. How can we give feedback to this oracle, this person? So I would say when people are going into leadership or they're thinking about it or they have by default maybe become a leader, is making sure that you reach out and you kind of drive as hard as possible to get feedback. That doesn't mean to be a massive 360, takes hours. Some simple things is, you know, what am I doing well? What am I not doing well? What can I improve on a regular basis to start to get trends, you know, in the table to say, right, where am I? And also, okay, hold on a second. Last week I was doing this well. I'm not doing it so well. Look back and say, right, okay, these may be the things that have affected that.
Yeah, I suppose it's that self-awareness, isn't it? And maintaining that. And on a regular basis, I suppose it also shows the people that you are leading that you're willing to take that feedback and act on it. And if they see you do that, again, that's a form of acting from the front, leading from the front.
Yeah.
If you're willing to develop yourself, they will be more likely to then do the same in their roles. And it's a waterfall effect, maybe, all the way down.
And so, you know, loads of companies that I speak to, you know, well, we've just had our engagement survey, you know, and so these are the big things that have come out of it. So there is a kind of short-term overreaction, right? We need to change these. And then you wait, and then a year comes around, and we do it again. Same things have popped up. Hold on a second. So you need to understand to consistently, you know, everyone talks about, you know, the 1%ers marginal gains, which is an interesting place to go to. But really, it's that continuous learning and that continuous improvement is the way that we're going to get there.
Do you think with those sort of like annual surveys of the workplace and how people think we're doing at certain aspects of the role, do they bring value or should it be more of a consistent check in with people, do you think?
I think it can be a moment of like, right, let's have a whole look at the, we touched on this, a holistic kind of, right, what is happening with our people. And then you get this whole load of information. And then you should be saying, right, very similar to what we spoke about. We are here. In a year's time, we want to be here. What does that look like? Right. Well,
Mm,
these are the biggest elements that we need to fit. We need to figure them out. Right. Okay. Over the next 3 months, these are going to be our focus. Once we've kind of got to the end of 3 months, instead of doing the whole survey again, can we ask those questions again that were stood out? Right. Okay. They seem to be better. Are they good enough? Okay, they're good enough. Right. Okay, we'll hold there. Go back to the survey. What was the next couple of things?
right.
So eventually, after that year, you have made a few changes, and you go back to the people in your company and say, "Hey, look, this was the engagement survey. Over the year, we've done this. This is where we feel we're at the moment. Do you agree?"
Mm,
I think that drives that continuous kind of
mm,
thought process of like, right, we're here. How do we get better? Have a bit of a plan. Because the wellness space is an interesting one to be at. Because how do we create a culture of wellness? And if I look back now, probably definitely some of the athletes that I was working with, we didn't have that level of wellness, But now it's like, right, okay, we know that if we can support the individual from a wellness point of view, their performance is sustainable, which is the big thing.
mm. And how would you go about increasing that wellness, whether it's within a sports or corporate area? Is there ways as a leader, maybe you can help encourage that wellness?
Yeah, and I think you have to, again, you have to demonstrate good wellness. You have
Mm,
to demonstrate that, you know, your sleep is important to you. So I'm not sending emails to my staff at 10, 11 o'clock at night expecting things to come back before, you know, 9 o'clock. I'm not sending emails on a Saturday morning or a Sunday or I'm being quite strategic in when they go.
mm,
I'm making sure that, people are seeing me do exercise. I'm making sure that I look like I'm healthy. I've all these types of things. I think definitely we've seen if we look at kind of some top CEOs, they all look, or not necessarily top CEOs, but lots of CEOs look
mm.
like, like semi professional athletes to a certain degree.
Again, it's the simple things and just done right. And like you say, be strategic when you send your emails. Don't demand that people are sending you things back on a weekend or stuff like that. Um, but just doing the simple things well is a form of wellness. I think people sometimes forget that and maybe overthink wellness as you've got to go and meditate during the day for however long. I don't know. But yeah, just doing the simple things well, it sounds like. It's,
Yeah, and I think the takeaway from that is that simple things are not necessarily easy, and easy things are not simple. So, right, okay, I need more sleep. Simple to go to bed earlier. Well, that's great, but what happens if you've got a big project on, or you've got kids to put down to bed, or you're having to work late, or whatever it might look like. So it's simple, but actually it's not easy. I
mm,
think you know that's the dichotomy that we sometimes come under, is that we just hear simple and think easy.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. I agree. Um, and again, so coming on to yourself and bringing your children into the world. So a lot of the people you work with, I imagine, go through the similar things. And a lot of parents out there will agree that having your first child, especially, is a massive shift in lifestyle. So, how did that challenge you in terms of your work life balance at that time?
So I think you don't really think about it. It just kind of, right, okay, this is the plan. Hopefully, if it's planned.
Yeah.
Um, and so you kind of work your way around it. I'm not a great believer in this idea of work-life balance that we put out there, because ultimately we don't. If you do have work-life balance, you don't have it for very long, and it comes back to that control issue.
Mm.
So yeah, well, I've got work-life balance, and then kid gets sick, or a client kicks off, or something happens with your health, or whatever it looks like, and that completely shifts that balance. I'm very much a believer of how do we integrate work as part of you. So if we look at Sam as across the board, you've definitely got some things underneath you that hold you up. So, you know, your girlfriend, your job, your, training, whatever it looks like, they're your pillars that I call them that are helping you up.
Yep.
Now, if you spend too much time in one area, so for example, work, so work expands and pushes all those other things to one side, your work's holding you up. Now, what happens if you lose your job or something goes wrong and that big pillar that's been holding you up just goes, and then you kind of turn around and you haven't been there for, your wife, your husband, your kids don't really know you, your friends think, you haven't developed your friendships, or all your friendships are linked with your title of your job or all the activities, etc., etc. It all comes crashing down.
Mm.
So if you want to be good at something, we know it takes time. Now, that's great. But we also know that sometimes we need to shift the pendulum back into how it looks like from that perspective. So, if you imagine then, so for me, so work, wife, pillars, etc., etc., and then the dad pillar comes in, and so there's a struggle between how it goes,
Yeah.
and to understand that I can't be on all the time. I can't be at work thinking about my family. I can't be with my family thinking about my work. So everyone's on about, let's be present, be present. And I really think it's actual engagement, making sure that, if you are with that person, then you are engaged in what's going on. You're playing with your kids, you're being with them, you're taking interest in what they're doing, whether that's, toys, drawing, playing football, whatever it looks like.
Mm.
And then when you go to work, again, you are focused on the people around you delivering projects. And I think that all stems from high performance sport and that flow psychology, that kind of golden moment whereby, you're just thinking about that one thing, and that's the way that we work best. And people don't really see that.
Yeah. I really like that. The way you talk about it with the pillars as a visualization of what's propping you up, and then if one gets too big, it pushes others out the way and it becomes unstable. It sort of makes it easier to understand for people potentially. It's just certainly for me, it makes sense to me, and people do tie themselves into they tie who they are into a title. So like, I am a firefighter. Well, if I lost my job, I wouldn't be a firefighter. So that would then hit me a lot harder if that was my entire being and everyone knew me as Sam the firefighter. What else have I got? Whereas if I know what my drives are, what other things I've got going for me, and it just allows you to have, again, we spoke about earlier, that coming up against those challenges, and life is just full of challenges. That is the nature of it. It gives you a much better base to start that on, I suppose.
Yeah. I see it all the time, and then what happens is that, let's say you're not a firefighter. Well, I've seen lots of people say, oh, hi, my name's Sam. I'm an ex-firefighter.
Yes.
And you're like, hold on. I've seen it before, especially with athletes that I've worked with. And so, there are huge challenges for athletes when they retire, is that you see it all the time, professional rugby player, then it's like ex-professional rugby player.
Yeah.
And they still want that. They still realise that's, and don't get me wrong, it's a huge part. They've sacrificed so much to be that person, and again, they've moulded themselves into that environment. They've kind of become a product of the people that they hang around with.
Yeah.
And so it's really difficult. It's a challenge, and I know lots of players that I work with that got lost for a good year, 2 years.
You see it a lot in sports, don't
Yeah.
you?
And it's no different to, I say it's no different to, and I don't want to say because of experience, but see it in the military,
Yeah.
and it's very, so for a rugby player or one of my athletes I was working with, they would know exactly what they're doing for the next 4 weeks. I'd be able to say, right, in 3 weeks on a Tuesday morning, you're doing these exercises at probably these weights. And they're like, right, brilliant. And then they retire and there's nobody saying, hey, Sam, here's your next 4 weeks. This is what it looks like. This is where we're traveling to. These are things you're going to be eating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then,
Yeah.
and then again, if you look at the pillars, that rugby player was the biggest pillar that they had.
Yeah.
And then it's gone. And I'm like, oh dear.
Yeah. It's one of the most common things, like when people meet someone new and they say, what do you do? And they mean, what do you do for work almost all the time? Well, I find it really interesting because could you reply with something like, what do you actually do? What are you trying to do in life? Like, I'm trying to help people by helping people on the worst day of their life, potentially as a firefighter, as a Samaritans listener, doing this podcast, helping people be better. So really that should be my answer. But again, we always go to what we do for work. And it's like just emphasizing that labeling of yourself and other people. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a really interesting thing.
Yeah. Does it make you a good person? Or again, I suppose the idea of, the ego,
Mm.
So what, if we don't have a title, or if we don't have a cool job or whatever it might look like, or what's perceived as a cool job, do people think less of us? Whatever that looks like,
Yeah.
and so you've got to, I'm a person that helps and supports people. They won't be like, what? And yeah, all right,
Yeah.
mate, okay, crack on. And I guarantee that most people will be like, hold on a second. So what do you actually do? Oh, well, I do this, this, and this. And it kind of, imagine if you're a CEO of a massive corporation and then you lose that and you meet someone new and they say, oh, what do you do? You're like, hold on a second. I don't know. And I don't know myself, and I don't know my wife or husband or my kids. And it's like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a lot to learn from this in terms of learning more about yourself, what actually drives you, and like you said, engagement over just being present. So being next to someone doesn't mean you're engaging with them. We could both be sat here and something else could be happening. So yeah, that engagement side of it as well is quite important, I think. In terms of your company, so Cognitive Athlete, what led you to start that?
So I was working in a performance environment with some seniors, and we were trying to drill down around what can we take from sport, from being an athlete. And his feedback was, I'm not an athlete. And I was like, yeah, but you're cognitively an athlete. Your brain is your biggest performer, is the key for you success.
Mm.
That doesn't mean that we split, body and mind, etc., or thinking and movement, etc. It just means that we need to try to do as many things to support you from a decision-making point of view, from a leadership point of view. And that kind of led on to me thinking about, right, what can we bring from sports science? What can we bring from high-performance sports? Because sometimes we try to fit these similarities from sports into business, and sometimes there are clear things that just don't fit.
Mm.
So that has been the kind of journey that, from a cognitive athlete point of view. And so it's been fun, it's been challenging, it's been really difficult. It's been, you're on the kind of business ownered roller coaster of massive highs, massive lows.
Mm.
And very similar, again, in a season of rugby or football or whatever, there are massive highs, there are massive lows. And to come back to that, right, okay, I'll never forget that we just lost a game and training in the week had been not great, and a coach kind of brought everyone in, and you know, we're all arms are our shoulders, and he was like, "This is not personal," and walked away. And one of the players said something to me. He said, like, "It's not personal, but you need to take it personally."
Mm.
So it's not attack on Sam the individual, but hold on, you've got a personal responsibility to sort this out.
Mm.
And I thought that was hugely impactful for me, because when you get feedback, or when things don't go well in business, or you know, a client doesn't want your services, or you've done this big proposal and you've put loads of effort in, and they say no, very often, or quite easy, it is like, I attack myself, or what did I not do? You know, it's all me. Whereas
Mm.
actually, it's not all you. We don't know what their situation is. We don't know what's happened from their perspective. What can we learn? How can I personally be better next time?
Yeah, I suppose it's the difference of putting yourself down and trying to think of what you didn't do. And instead, you should be thinking, okay, it didn't happen. What can I do next time? So rather than looking at what, it's just a reframing, I suppose. But you're right, in terms of people take things very personally. And in that mindset, people don't really take things in. They just feel under attack or whatever it may be. Whereas if you can say it and people can take it and take bits out of it and work out what they can do better, yeah, that's definitely, I can see how that'd be a lot better, a
Yeah.
lot more beneficial.
You know, if we look at the idea of ownership and owning what goes on, it's very powerful. It puts people back into a position of what can I influence, um, and that's been this whole conundrum, and it's really interesting then to be in that situation, to then be coaching people that are also in that situation, or that they are trying to work and navigate situations when there has been a no, and how do I respond to it,
Mm.
and what's my default, what's the way that I kind of get over this. Is it,
Mm.
going home, having a few beers, watching something on telly, and doing all these things, or sometimes, even though we put it in this amazing light, exercising, going to the gym and killing themselves to try to not to think about it.
Mm.
And so,
It's a distraction.
yeah, how in touch are we with what's going on, or how much from a day-to-day point of view are we trying to distract ourselves, whether that's screens, whether that's watching Netflix, YouTube, going for a run, or it's amazing how many times I'll go for a run or something, and you'll see people, taking their dogs for a walk and looking at their phones, and I'm just like, hold on a second, this is a perfect opportunity not to ingest information.
Yeah.
We're in an, I'm not saying they can listen to your podcast and listen when they're
Yeah,
walking,
please do.
but how much are you just taking on board life as what we know it?
Yeah. We're in such a information rich world now, with so much information at our fingertips 24 hours a day. And it can definitely overwhelm people and make them feel a lot more overwhelmed, is the word that I would use, actually, in terms of there's so much going on. Where do I even start? Well, actually, just put it away for a minute, work out what actually matters. And I suppose, does this just come down to that self-awareness again? Like, how can people start to understand themselves in that way? Is it just speaking to people and saying, what do you think I do well? What do you think I can do better? Is there anything else that comes to mind?
If we look at self-awareness, obviously the title is self. Let's start with us. So just that mini review from yourself, from where you are at the end of the day or at the end of the week. What did Sam do? What did Sam do well this week? What can I improve? What can I do better?
Mm.
And that's a good way to go to start that process. There's a great kind of tool that you can use, especially if you're kind of in the middle, whereby you ask those questions to somebody that reports to you, somebody that's the same level as you, and somebody above you. And then you get what everybody is thinking, because the person above you will give you direct, honest feedback. The person below you will sugarcoat it, and depending on your relationship with the person next to you, we'll see how that can pan out.
Yeah.
But you get an overarching theme, and how we kind of transverse those interactions is really kind of the key to that. So
Mm.
what people are perceiving you as, that's the starting point.
Yeah.
And ultimately taking those time outs of just being a human being, not a human doing.
Mm.
We're not even in an age of information. We're probably in an age of artificial intelligence that we're going into, and we're not thinking about what can we implement. I'm not a great fan of this whole idea of readers are leaders or leaders are readers, because great, you can read 50 books a year, but actually, how much are you taking out of them?
Mm.
And what are you doing from a day-to-day basis to change? I work with lots of people in there. They're like, oh, I've been reading these books and something resonates with me, but then after about 2 or 3 weeks, it doesn't really kick in. And if we go back to the gym, what we started talking, too many people change their program too quickly because
Yeah.
they just see an exercise on Instagram, or they just see somebody and they're like, right, I want to be like them, or I want to look like them. So if I do the training, I'll become them.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, you've got to kind of, again, question yourself, why do you want to look like that?
Mm.
What's your driver to be that?
Mm.
And second of all, it's interesting is that lots of professional athletes that I've worked with, it's probably taken them a good few years to understand what they need to prepare. And so we will control the environment, we'll influence the environment, we'll build out a program for them, but it gets to a certain point where you just say, off you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose it comes back to the education at the start is so important. And also that at the start there, just talking about sort of your self-awareness in yourself and how you come across to other people, what they think of you. I suppose it's like trying to match those up in a way. So if you work out who you are and who you want to be, and then how people actually perceive you, and work out if they are in line, if they're slightly off, what am I actually not doing to get me to where that is, and just trying to make them match up. Is that fair to say?
Yep. And
Yeah.
where you want to be, and we'll probably go back again, is that sometimes to really find out about that, you've got to go to some not very nice places. You've got to go
Mm.
back to some things that have caused you to create these scripts in your head to where you want to go.
Mm.
And going back and going through those things can be really traumatic and you've got to do it at the right time, right place, etc. All those
Mm.
types of things.
Mm.
But ultimately, if you are trying to become a better person, then that's what you need to do.
In terms of we spoke about your business and why you started it. What have you learned from that experience of starting your own business? You said you've sort of there's obviously the challenges that most people starting a business might come up across. What have you learned from that experience?
I suppose the biggest element is that you can be a world-class provider and a very good coach or whatever it is. But if you are not very good at marketing and sales, you're not going to get very far. And so you go on this journey and you have to morph it, not morph into them, but you have to learn about sales, marketing, accounts, proposals, all this area that you, in a past life, I would, you know, day one of pre-season, right? Here's your 20 athletes to work with for the next year. But now it's a case of, right, well, if I don't do anything, I'm not going to get 20 people through the door tomorrow.
Mm,
And how do you go about navigating that?
mm. And where do you sort of see the future of the company? Do you have a goal for where you want to take it, areas you want to move into at all, or?
Yeah, it, ultimately, I think that from my perspective as a human being, you're trying to make or I'm trying to make as much impact on people as possible. Now, I'm not, we're not going to take over the world, or that's not the plan. But one thing that we really want to do, and it's going to take some time, and it's just, imagine if you're a massive tanker ship, it's just that half a degree kind of turn that causes that big thing.
Mm,
Is to really affect companies' kind of performance cultures, and to think about, right, how can we perform the best and also have great understanding of the people around us,
mm,
so that we're not in this scenario whereby, there's that burnout or that happens or whatever, and they just get replaced. We're trying to kind of get that from that perspective.
right.
And so, as I spoke to you before, there is a wealth of amazing coaches that have been in professional sports that have thought to themselves, actually, I fancy a pivot, or I want to move.
Mm,
So I'm fortunate enough to have coaches that work for me as associates that have got the similar background to me and that are passionate around. You've got a drug. Coaching is our drug. Is, seeing somebody go from A to B
mm,
is a drug, and you've got all these people that, right, need to get their fix to a certain degree, and they're not able to do it,
yeah.
or they're trying to find their way to get it. I think that's where we'd like to see it going,
Mm,
because I would say, since coming into corporate performance and well-being 2016, 7 years down the line, nearly 8 years down the line, what has actually changed?
mm,
We're still seeing high levels of burnout, more people disengaged, greater stress, greater anxiety, more mental health issues, etc.
mm,
Nothing's changing.
mm. Well, starting in 2016, obviously, then you'd have been working in that space throughout sort of COVID. So, did that change how you work in those spaces?
So again, working from home, brilliant for some people,
Mm,
especially pros and cons. If you've got a family, it was great. You were able to kind of spend more time with your kids, or not have to commute. And then obviously, as we shifted and we made that return back, we're able to be more flexible. There's not many industries are, right, got to be in the office like normal, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. There's a more flexible approach. And then the con of that was that my office is there, and I walk out of my office and my family are right there. So all my stress, or all my kind of level of what's just been going on, it's quite easy just to dump that onto the first person you see.
mm,
Whereas if you're in an office, you leave, you commute, I'm sure that you've done a shift as a firefighter, and you've had that time to decompress on the way home from a shift. You haven't kind of come up against somebody straight away off that shift. And that can be an issue for some people, is how do we not let those pillars start to merge into each other? Because ultimately, if we do that, we're not engaged in one or the other. And that's a big issue that we start to see. So I think that from that perspective, COVID kind of allowed us to pause. Don't get me wrong, there was huge negatives around what happened, and people are probably still in that case at the moment. But how do we go about kind of using it for our advantage?
Yeah, I suppose there's pros and cons of both, but that sort of split between work and home. Um, One of my most recent guests, Ben, spoke about when he gets on the tube, that is, like you say, that decompression. So, okay, this is now me going from work to home or home to work. And he starts to get into that mindset. And he's given himself that time as that moment. And like you say, when you work from home, it gets very blurred 100% when your living room is also your office.
Yep.
So,
So how can you put in a false commute?
yeah,
How can you say,
go for a little walk or
go
something.
for a little walk or breathe or listen to some music, whatever it is.
Mm,
I think that there is a stat around, there was an increase in people drinking alcohol
right.
because that was a way to switch off from work.
Yeah.
So
I
I'm
wouldn't
at
be
home.
drinking at work.
No, I'm at
So,
home.
yeah.
5:30 rolls around. Right, I finish work. I have a beer, wine,
Yeah.
whatever it looked like, and that was a kind of key to think of right,
Yeah.
and an occasional glass of wine, beer, whatever it looks like. But if that's your method, then what happens is, if you do it consistently for 2, 3, 4 weeks, your body's like, actually, do you know what? I need that beer to decompress, or I need that switch off. And again, that is a decompression method that is not conducive to, oh, actually, it's a Friday, so I've had a beer, I'll have another beer. And then what happens is that we don't get restorative sleep. We wake up the next day, we're groggy, we probably don't do as much exercise, we don't eat as well as we could do. And there's just that kind of the Ed Sheeran, song, one drink, and it just kind of snowballs out to that process.
I think it's been really, interesting learning about it all. So, just bring it into the end, Lee. One of the things I like to do at the end of an episode is ask the guests to leave a question for the listener. So this comes from when I listen to podcasts. I like to go away and have conversations about the topic with other people. So if you were going to leave a question for a listener to go away and ask a family member or a friend, colleague, what would that question be?
So I think, come back to one of the things is, if you went to somebody and said, what am I doing well at the moment? And just paused and let them reflect and come back at you in a positive way and see what that leads to.
Good question. I like it.
Yeah.
Lee, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure, and I've
welcome.
really enjoyed it. So if people want to find you online or find the business, how can they do that?
So probably my main social media outlet is LinkedIn, just under my name. And then Cognitive Athlete is w.cognitiveathlete.co.uk.
Awesome.
People can find out more about us there.
Sweet. I'll link it all below for anyone listening. But for the listeners, if you have enjoyed the episode, please do share it with a friend or family member who you think would find some value from it. If you haven't already, then please do follow and rate the show, as it really helps us reach new people. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly from me, thank you for listening.